There's no inventory. There's no inventory carrying cost. There's no space for the inventory. There's no wasted stuff. There's nothing that you've made that hasn't been sold. Like 30% of clothing that's made is never even worn. 38% of food that is produced is never eaten.
Today, I'm talking with and learning from my friend, Kaihan Krippendorff. He has a knack for spotting what others overlook. He's written a couple of fantastic books, Outthinking the Competition and Driving Innovation from Within. He's helped companies like Microsoft, L'Oreal, and GE. So he's worked with some big Fortune 500 companies. But in his new book, Proximity, I think he brings his strategic insight to a level which can be used by us, mere mortals, companies trying to scale, startups. Proximity flips the traditional approach on strategy, and instead of focusing on outspending, outproducing, or outmarketing, Kaihan argues that the real advantage comes from getting closer to customers, closer to new ideas, closer to the problems that actually need solving. And he thinks that companies that master this don't just compete better, they make competitors irrelevant. So that's what we're going to dig into today with Kaihan. A fantastic conversation. I loved it. I'm sure you will too.
Hey, my name is Kaihan Krippendorff. I'm the author of several business books. I'm a speaker, and I also am the founder of Outthinker Networks, which is a peer network of strategy officers and strategists.
Before you had this amazing life, what did you do?
I was a consultant at McKinsey and Company.
Uh-huh.
And then before that, I was an investment banker. Before that, I was a student.
Uh-huh. Okay. Mm-hmm. Very good.
Yeah,
and so
very simple life.
I want to talk about proximity, but why did you end up writing your first book?
Because I was really bored. I had no friends in the city that I was living in the country I was living in. I was living in the Dominican Republic, and I had followed a friend there, and I really didn't know anyone. I had these weekends with nothing to do, and I found a book that was a translation of an ancient Chinese text, which is a set of 36 fables of stratagems, as they're called. And so really I had nothing to do. And so I would go to the office on the weekends and just start collecting business cases and classifying it to these 36. There's no intention to write a book. It was a curiosity. Then it became an intention to write a paper. And then eventually after 3 years of just doing it, it became enough to be a book.
And what was the first book called?
It's called The Art of the Advantage.
Fantastic.
36 strategies to seize the competitive edge was the subtitle.
And that book stood the test of time.
That has been the basis of like all my work, really, and the way I think. It is this. It's I can say this because it's not. I didn't come up with these 36. They were written sometime around 500 AD, based off of 1,000 years of storytelling and distillation of strategic stories. It is just a really rich catalog, and I think it encapsulates everything that humans know about strategic patterns and options.
Do you know what? I was going to talk about proximity, but I'm going to keep talking to you about this for a bit.
Let's do this, yeah.
We were talking the other day, and I find that one of my pet peeves is that people do this thing that they call strategic planning, and they have this annual strategic planning event. And what they do is they do planning. Right? There's nothing strategic about it. They do a budget and they've got some resources and they work out how they're going to allocate the resources. And maybe there's some new sales coming in, so they've got some more money, and they just put together a plan to spend money. And, they sort of, how do I set the goal for next year? Well, maybe it's 10% higher than last year-ish, or sales have a punt and somebody talks them up, and ops have a punt and somebody talks them down in terms of costs. And then the year after year after year, and that was my experience in corporate life. As I came through my corporate career, that's how strategy was done. And I found people are CEOs in particular, because quite often, I'm working with businesses where they had one idea and that's worked. And now they need some more ideas. They don't need more planning. They need, they actually need a strategy, and they don't know what to do. And so you're this sort of this catalog of 36. Give me some examples then, because you said you started off doing case studies, and I know you've updated those case studies, some of them along the way. But what are some of these examples of things that you could read and use to inspire to try and think of what you could do in your business?
Yes. Yeah, I think well, first of all, the strategic planning versus strategy making, they're both needed. I think the planning is really the alignment so that people understand and they coordinate their actions. But there's this phrase, vision without action is a daydream, but action without vision is a nightmare. You need both, right? So you can have the alignment conversations and get people all running in the wrong direction. You could figure out the right direction, but not involve people, and then they just keep going back the old way. You really need both, And I do think some of the strategic conversations are what I call generative conversations, in that they're true because we say they're true. What is our mission? What is our purpose? That's not, you don't look outside and calculate what it should be, right? It's true because you say it's true. So I do think that you need both. But in terms of creating an option and choosing an option, it really helps to look through a pattern. And so just as an example, one of the patterns is seize the deer in the headlights moment, which originally in ancient Chinese language was called seize the opportunity to lead the sheep away. And the principle here is that the fable is that there's a homeless man. He's got no food. He's got no money. He's walking down the road, and he thinks, if I just had a sheep, if I could. He saw some sheep in the distance. If I had one of those sheep, I could eat it and I wouldn't be hungry, or I could sell it. I wouldn't be penniless. So as he approaches these sheep, he's thinking about taking one, but there is a shepherd looking over the sheep. So he kind of tossed the idea aside. While he's walking through the herd, the shepherd walks up the hill and turns his back, and this poor guy makes this calculation. If I were to take a sheep right now, what would happen? First of all, the shepherd wouldn't see me. And if he did turn around and see me, he wouldn't be able to run down the hill in time to stop me here. I would already be further down the road. And if he were to come after me, he would leave his sheep, this big flock of sheep, exposed. So he's now on the horns of a dilemma. Do I save that one sheep, or do I protect my flock of sheep? Right? So the strategic principle is put your competition on the horns of a dilemma in which they have to choose between protecting something small that you want to take and putting something big that they care about at risk, or letting you have it. Now, we could say that is disruption.
Yeah.
Right? Disruption is targeting a market segment that your competitors don't view as valuable as their core. And so they intentionally choose, not because they don't see you doing it, not because they don't think about what the consequence would be, not because they don't value it, but they have to choose to defend their core. Right? So that's an example of a strategic pattern.
Well, and, Blockbuster, Netflix, there's one,
Yep.
Blockbuster weren't going to give up late fees.
Yes.
All of the change in steel manufacturing,
Yes.
giving up rebar.
Yes.
Honda's entry into the motorcycle market in the US, classic.
Yes.
Harvard Business Review.
Right.
Case study.
Right. Yeah. The low end.
All of those.
Yes. Exactly.
It's like, what is the segment that the big player has that is not profitable, or for some reason doesn't want, or if we have a better offer, couldn't afford to copy our offer across their base. And when you were talking, I was thinking the moral dilemma was on me, the poor man, because I'm thinking, nick one of these guys, nick one of these sheep.
What's interesting about these narratives is that, there's 36 of them. There may be only like 7 or 8 really strategic concepts that are taught in business school. And so because they're more nuanced. So you talked about another narrative that pairs really nicely. There's another narrative which is embrace what's been abandoned, or originally borrow a corpse for the soul's return. But the principle is there's something that your competitors have abandoned, and because they've abandoned it, moved on to the new thing, if you were to go take it, they won't come back and defend it. Not because of the dilemma of I want to protect the core, but because that's old. That's, whether that is RIM using the abandoned text network to create BlackBerry, right? They had moved on using old technologies, old positions, old methods. But you see, like, they both result in the competition choosing not to copy you, but those are two similar but different ways to do that.
you're doing some work with a client and you're thinking about using these 36, do you expose clients to all 36, or is it, right, and you talk it through, or do you pick what you think are the top 5, or?
Yeah, no, we don't use all 36, only for practical reasons. I think technically you could use all 36, but that's part of the challenge and opportunity in strategy is people don't have enough time to actually consider the universe of possibilities, right? So we have to strategically narrow in. There's a level of cognitive overload after which people just like, I can't think of it a different way, but these patterns help you think of it in more ways. So really there's like 3 different ways that we typically would do it. Either there's 5 general ones. If I'm doing a facilitation and, my research shows that there are certain narratives that successful companies are using today more frequently than their non-successful peers. So you could just say, which are the winning patterns today, Mm-hmm. Another way to do it is to just randomly pick them. And it's pretty actually remarkably, like it seems almost like there's some magic going on. You just pick one at random and then it's a little bit like the I Ching. I don't know, have you ever used the I Ching or done the I Ching as like no? Do you know the I Ching at all? It's a Chinese, it's an ancient Chinese, maybe arguably like the first written text, Chinese text. And it's a set of these 81 different things. Anyway, it's hard to explain, but Carl Jung, the psychologist, he wrote an introduction to one of the most popular translations of the I Ching. And he talks about how, it's random, but it seems the randomness makes it feel intentional. I think it's almost like the original AI, right? It's just spitting out stuff, but it's in our interpretation of it that it starts making sense. So anyway, so the randomness, randomly picking it, because the way you're thinking, how could that apply to me? And so you find the way it can apply to me, even though it wasn't chosen because of your situation. And then we also have, and this tool, what we call a stratagem selector. So I kind of coded it. So are you on the offensive or defensive? Are you big or small? Are you looking for growth or defense? And so there's 4 different questions that you ask, and then it'll sort them and prioritize them so that you're more likely to, the ones that are more likely to be relevant to you are towards the top.
Fantastic. And you then get into, you've got then some facilitated conversation rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper and saying to people, right, what should we do?
Right.
Yeah. And because that's the thing that just terrifies people, which is why they do the planning.
Yes.
Because like the planning is a thing they can get their heads around. When I say to people, look, strategy, we're just going to make this shit up, right? We want somebody in the future to do a thing, like buy a product or something, right? We're gonna make up this future. And you can see the CFO going, this is not a thing, like for me, right? You may as well be asking me to draw pictures with crayons. It's not, I'm not doing this exercise. It makes me feel uncomfortable. But if you give people some solidity around, here's a stratagem, there's only X number of strategies, here's one we've picked, how would it apply to us? Then it's much more concrete for people.
Yeah, I agree. Constraints unlock creativity. I don't think that people are good at thinking outside of the box. It sounds like just sort of like a clever phrase, but I think it really true. We don't want to ask people to think outside the box. We want to give them a different box to think in.
Yes.
So if you say, let's just take the sheep analogy, right? And you say, like, you tell that story and you say, what is the sheep that if you took it, your competitors wouldn't defend it, right? And then you apply it to your situation, then you give people a structure. It's like it really is a narrative, and you tie the first steps of the narrative to your current situation, and then ask, what is the natural next step?
Well, and immediately you ask that question to me, I'm thinking none of the 100 or so clients we've ever worked with have been able to successfully answer the question, why would somebody buy from you and not from your competitor? And then you get into some discussion about what an ideal customer profile is, but again, without context. And so if you then say, what's the sheep that our competitor would allow us to take, right? You are talking then about a product or a service for an ideal customer and the whole thing starts to have some context. And then you can start to say, well, is that the same as our current customer base, or is it different?
Yes.
And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes. And you can start that by saying, what is the flock of sheep that they really value? And look at the asymmetry between their business and your business. Where do they make their money, their prestige, what's their history? And what is that thing that they will value highly and not want to abandon? And then say, what is something that if they were to pursue it, it would require them to abandon it? And so like that metaphor of the flock of sheep and the individual sheep, it just helps people kind of like visualize it and name it.
The other thing that occurs to me is it might even help you not make strategic mistakes, right? Because if you're trying to think of a strategy and it doesn't fit any one of the predefined boxes, right? And so what I was thinking about, all the major airlines sort of tried to do a version of Southwest, but because they didn't do it properly, they weren't trying to steal underserved customers from a competitor. They were trying to sort of dumb down their offering to try and nullify Southwest's offering, and ended up just losing money. Well, it's because it didn't fit. It's like, the sheep. You're trying to get some sheep to do it to buy something which you've defined as shitter, right? And it's like that's going to be a tough sell.
Yes, yeah, and we don't want to make the hard choices that are required to really do that well.
These are at your fingertips, so this shouldn't be too difficult. Give me another one of your favorite. If the sheep's one, what's another box that we could put people in?
I like to create something out of nothing. It's really freeing. The idea is that we tend to look at a game and think that we have to play with the pieces on the board, because in the West, almost all games are that way, right? You have a certain number of soccer players on a soccer field. You have a certain number of chess pieces on the chessboard. So the assumption is it is about moving the pieces on the board. But there's another way. There are other types of games, like in many countries, in Asian countries, the analog to chess is Go. And in Go, the rules are sort of the opposite, in that you can't move the pieces on the board. You add pieces and you remove pieces. You see a spot and you place a piece down. If you surround someone, you take their pieces off. Now that's like kind of a deep metaphor for how you play a business. Now let's say, what if we looked at our business that way? We can't influence anything that's there. All we can do is remove things and add things, right? Now what starts opening up is things like, where is there a customer that is not on the board? They're not buying from me. They're not buying from a competitor. They're just not even there. No one's even like thinking of them as a customer. They're like they're a piece of the chessboard that's already off the chessboard, right? What would it look like to add them to the chessboard? Why are they not in the game? And that speaks to Clayton Christensen's one permutation of this is Clayton Christensen's concept of non-consumption. Why are people not consuming? Either they can't afford it, they don't think they can afford it, either they don't have access to it, they don't know how to use it, or they don't have time. And so you can look for these pockets of non-consumption and then try to remove that. Another example is categories. I think categories are really powerful. A lot of great companies have created categories. We think in categories. Gatorade is like, one example. They selling salty water on football fields for years, right? And they're growing and growing, but Pepsi and Coke aren't really paying attention to them. There is no category for sports drink yet. I imagine they're at their marketing meetings and they are looking through all the different categories, and they don't see the category growing. So the creating of a category, Apple is also good at creating categories or taking categories and blowing them up. I did this workshop way back when. I can talk about my old work, but like for a group at Microsoft, and they were looking at what was going to be the iPad. They called it the Slate at the time. And they looked at the categories, and there was the category for what they called tablet computers was really small. And so they just didn't think that there was a threat. So they said, there's nothing for us to do. But Apple's very good at creating categories.
Well, when you were talking about Gatorade, I immediately thought Red Bull.
Yes, Red Bull. Yeah, creating the energy drink.
You drink Red Bull with, God, there's this Austrian terrible liqueur. But, fraternity parties, rugby clubs, hen parties, you go skiing and you drink the two things together.
Yes, and then Red Bull also creates occasions too. I think that's also like occasions, right? Like the tequila occasion. You mentioned tequila, right? There is this occasion that tequila marketers market specifically to. Maybe it's like you're with a group of friends, you've had 3 drinks, and you're all together laughing. That triggers this occasion. Let's get a round of tequila shots, right?
Yeah, complete madness. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt the conversation just for a minute because I don't want you to miss this. My new book, Mind Your Fucking Business, is out on Amazon. If you're thinking yet another business book, I think you're wrong. This is actually a blueprint to cutting through the noise and achieving unparalleled success for you. It's based on 10 years of business coaching, spotting similar problems that people have had and coming up with real-world solutions. If it's supercharging sales, if it's mastering talent acquisition, building a powerhouse brand, cultivating a company culture that breeds success, then this book is a ticket to your transformative journey. It's filled with practical tools and frameworks that I use every single day with my clients as part of their coaching program. If you want to take your business from good to great, look, you can go to Amazon and you can buy it, or you can click the link in the show notes and head over to monkhouseandcompany.com. I'll send it to you today. I'll send you a copy for free. I want to help you build a fantastic business. Now, back to the conversation. That is fantastic. Let's jump out of that and let's chat about your new book, which is Proximity. What's the big idea?
So, big idea that people are very confused with a whole plethora of different trends that are going on, and it includes from deglobalization and environmental warming to AI to 3D printing to robotics. And all of that stuff can be explained by this one simple insight, which is that across every sector, value is being created closer and closer to the moment demand appears in time and in space.
Okay.
So let's say the example that I use that I think kind of is the most clear one is Coca-Cola has these freestyle machine vending machines. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah. They've got them in Five Guys.
Okay, yes, they've got them in Five Guys. That's right. And in a lot of movie theaters, at least in the States, and you walk up and you'll hit a caffeine-free diet, cherry, vanilla, Coke, Sprite, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
Now, if they were to try to sell a bottle of caffeine-free diet, cherry, vanilla, Sprite, the market for that would be very low, right? And how would you find the person that wants to buy that? They can offer it. Why? Because a lot of the value they create, creating a value often is the combining of things. In this case, it's the combining of molecules. It could be also the combining of digital things, but in this case, it's physical things. You take the soda and you mix it with the syrup. But when do you mix it? You mix it after they press the buttons. After they say what the demand is. And where do you mix it? You mix it right there in Five Guys. You don't mix it in a bottling plant miles away, right? So a lot of value gets created at the time and location that demand appears.
Because we don't need to move the packaging full of 99.9% water.
That is another thing. It is so much cheaper. It's so much cheaper.
We can just plug the damn thing in. But there's a price for this. So the margin is just astronomical. Like it's high anyway. And now all of a sudden it's just stratospheric.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Now you could capture that margin. You could give them a lower price. You talked about moving water. There are these new things. They are clothes washing detergent sheets.
Yeah.
Right. So when you do your laundry, you either like pour in some liquid or maybe there's a capsule that has liquid in it. Right. Mm-hmm. A lot of that liquid is water. That water is also available in your tap. It's in your washing machine. So like, why are you transporting water from Cincinnati or wherever the Procter & Gamble plant is across the country and wasting all of that energy and money and carbon emissions to transport the water to it? Why don't you mix it like in your washing machine. So as you start dismantling that idea, look at any industry, where's value get created, and against often by combining things. What if you could combine it and wait until they're, and the great thing about waiting is the best demand, the easiest demand to predict is the demand that's already there. We're not talking about predicting demand. We're actually talking about just waiting for demand to be there.
When I was reading the book, I was thinking, because you've got a chapter on defense and how it shows up in defense.
Yes.
And I was thinking maybe the Ukraine war has sort of mushroomed since you did the work. But that whole, drones, low-cost drones taking out, a tank that costs $2 million, there's a tank that got produced, had to be shipped all the way around the world,
Yes.
has to be maintained.
Yes.
And somebody turns up with a drone
Yep.
and straps some explosive to it and crashes it into a tank.
Yep. Yeah. And the U.S. Air Force has a really cool technology where, so there are the drones that are like the propeller drones that can go up and down and move around, right? But there are also fixed wing drones. And the fixed wing drones can go like longer distances. But depending on what the mission is for the drone, you need ideally a different design. Like if it has to go a long distance, you want a wing that is maybe wider. If it has to go up a mountain, then you need a different hull. If it's carrying something heavy, it needs to have bigger lift, right? So ideally, you could have a customized drone for the mission. So what they do now is they'll go onto a battlefield and they will use an AI design to design a drone that's tailor fit for the mission, given distance, height, payload, weight, or whatever. And then they have 3D printers that print the parts on the battlefield, and then they assemble them. And within 24 hours, they can have a newly assembled personalized drone. And the stuff that they don't have to transport parts. They don't have to have like different parts and different size wings and everything. It's just like the raw materials and the 3D printer.
The 3D printing thing is just,
yeah.
because one of the things you talk about is, look, okay, it's not possible to 3D print a car yet, but, could be.
But so many parts, like a lot of these parts of your cars, they cost more to ship than they are to make. Your garage has to keep all these different parts, like, the 1963 Ford versus the 1964 Ford has a different, I don't know, whatever. And you got to keep all this inventory. That stuff should just be printed. And a lot of car companies are now printing parts, especially for vintage cars. They just 3D print the parts when there is demand. But going back to that point, when there is demand, there's no inventory. There's no inventory carrying cost. There's no space for the inventory. There's no wasted stuff. There's nothing that you've made that hasn't been sold. Like 30% of clothing that's made is never even worn. 38% of food that is produced is never eaten.
Shine, the Singaporean clothing brand.
Yes.
They've got rid of returns by selling clothes that are so cheap there's no point in sending them back.
Throw them away. Right.
Just like,
and the amount of carbon that they emit by transporting them quickly across the ocean and packaging.
I know Zara did, I suppose their proximity thing was near-shore manufacturing, buying a massive amount of material and creating 10 styles from it. And, but that gives us the opportunity. So when the demand shows up, we can turn we can turn the raw material into the thing that's selling and not the thing that's not selling. Again, not holding inventory, only holding just-in-time inventories in stores,
exactly.
having no warehousing space.
It's almost like, what's the option value of the thing that you're holding? If you can hold the thing and you can make 10 different types of clothing from it, that is much more economical than making those 10 things and hoping that you're going to sell 3 of them or 7 of them.
When you were doing the book, were there some case studies or examples that you went, counterintuitive, never thought that would be a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm really interested in agriculture. I think that we underappreciate like how this can impact agriculture. As mentioned, 38% of food is never eaten, has gone to food waste, and yet people are starving. But you see vertical farms, control environment farming, able to grow at a higher output in smaller space with like 90% less water, a hydroponic garden that is in an enclosed environment that's sitting right next to a school or to restaurants or close to a city, right? And you can even get in that through that and through other technology or other techniques, you can get plants to grow faster. Like ginseng takes many years to grow, like I think 3 to 7 years to grow to the point where it's useful. There's one company we found, and they use this combination of hydroponic gardening and light to get the ginseng to be productive within months instead of years.
Right.
And then you can take those ingredients and you can 3D print food as well. And like if you can 3D print food,
you can really?
Yes. So you take the the ingredients, and you can print it so it looks like something. It has the fibers of meat. It has the textures, the patterns, right? Because a lot of what we don't want to just eat. Humans don't want to just eat goop, right? We want to make it feel like something and look like something. Now, crickets, for example, the amount of calories that's required to create 1 calorie of protein in crickets, it takes about 90% less than what it takes to produce the equivalent amount of protein for a cow, for example. And now you also can add on to that. You can add also that lab-grown meat. And there's a lot of really interesting companies that are well-funded that are growing meat in labs. So they take a few cells from an animal, and then they can replicate that and produce what at a molecular level is turkey or is pork. It doesn't have the fibers, so the 3D printing then allows you to look like the real thing.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, because we have a small farm here, right? So in the UK, 65% of the agricultural land won't support crops. It'll only support ruminants. And you need the ruminants because otherwise you have to put too much artificial fertilizer on the other stuff.
Yes.
And so there is an amazing sort of ecosystem and circularity to it all.
Yes.
But I think that ginseng example then sort of is the thing that then breaks you away from that.
Yeah, but think about like the crops, the soil health, and you mentioned crop health and pesticides. We can now deliver pesticides directly to where it's needed, so we don't need to blanket it. So getting the pesticide droplet, if you will, to the root of the one plant that is at risk is much more efficient and healthy and much more economical. So that's another example of proximity.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just a helpful lens for leaders and entrepreneurs to ask, what does P = 0 look like in my industry? Imagine the state in which your customers' need arises and you are already there, not only delivering the value, but creating the value. Now, there are lots and lots of steps that are blocking you. Sometimes they're technological, they're regulatory, they're organizational, they're industry norms, but each of those become little problems to solve. And if you can solve just one of those and just have a small step forward in proximity, it can create a huge competitive advantage. I mean, Google exists just because it can get information faster, a little bit faster than someone else, right? And that's why I think ChatGPT is so interesting, because it's not searching, it's creating, right? It's getting you even more specific information by putting it together when and where you are asking for it.
Well, do you know, the ChatGPT thing's really interesting. So, I've got a small device on my desktop that I use when I'm recording podcasts. And I've switched the back-end system on my machine. I've switched to a Mac, so I've had to set everything up again. So I went into ChatGPT and I said, how do I configure the UR22C Steinberg with a Mac? I didn't go and find the instruction manual online. I just did that. And ChatGPT went, dunk, 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 do this.
Yes.
And it's like, historically, that would have been a Google search. It would have been frustrating because I wouldn't have been able to find it.
And it would have been written 3 years ago before they had an update to the software. And so it would have been outdated, right? That content got created right then and there, well, at least right then, rather than in the past, hoping that someone might eat it. Yep.
It's just these changes are huge.
Exactly.
I've got some rapid fire questions for you. You ready?
Yeah.
What drives you every day?
My kids.
Okay. What's your genius?
My genius, connecting ideas, connecting things.
How many kids have you got? I
Three.
should have asked you that before.
Three.
How many? Three.
Three.
Boys, girls?
Boy, girl, boy.
Okay. How old are they?
They are 6. Well, one of them just changed age, so I have to pause for a second.
Yeah,
14, 17,
you get it wrong
18.
and they get really upset when you get it wrong.
14, 17, 18.
Okay. 14, 17. Okay. Fab. What unpopular opinion do you hold?
That entrepreneurs are not the primary drivers of innovation in society, but rather employees are.
Okay. That could be a completely different podcast episode. What's the most significant risk you've ever taken?
Starting my business.
Okay.
Yeah. Getting off the corporate track and just taking the leap and just saying, I'll figure out how to feed myself. I'll figure out how to pay rent next month, sometime this month.
How do you measure success?
I measure success by fulfillment. How much time in the day do I feel fulfilled, and am I in the zone, and do I just like forget time?
And what percentage are you at?
It varies each day, but if I can get to like 30 or 40%, that's a really good day.
Fab. So do you have a hobby, or is your job your hobby?
My job is my hobby. Often people ask, like we were skiing and I woke up early. I was like, I just need my own time. And I got my computer and I went, and my wife is, are you working? And I was like, well, that's when I feel alive.
Well, that alpha state thing,
Yeah.
Because when I'm talking to people about A players and high performance,
right.
Most often people have only they can only think about that in the context of a hobby, which is, you don't get paid for it, but it's enough that you create alpha state. I just wondered whether you were one of those people. I love doing this.
Yes.
And so,
yes,
it's great fun.
I think, if you look for the alpha state, you can figure out what it is. And then if you could get paid for that, like that's the ultimate.
Totally. Totally. Don't tell people they'll think we should be paid less because we enjoy this. What's the most recent thing you've learned or skill you've acquired?
Oh my gosh. I learn things every day because I get to talk to people like you and talk to entrepreneurs and talk to innovators. And oh my God, I don't know. I learn new things every day. It's hard to say. I feel like I was just talking to someone that I just feel like because of the work that I do, I'm on an accelerated master's class all the time.
On business and life.
Yes.
What's the worst business advice you've ever received?
Don't go into sales. That's the worst business advice I ever received. I received it when I was graduating from college, and someone that I love dearly, my aunt, who doesn't know anything about business, she said, whatever you do, don't go into sales. I think that took me like 20 years to get to reprogram myself to actually love sales.
Very good. What do you think is the biggest myth in business?
That it's about having a new idea. Even though my life is about creating new ideas, that it is that it's the new idea that makes it is the new idea that comes only after you understand all the other ideas that work.
Fab. How many books have you written now?
6.
So proximity. And then the first one that you were chatting about at the beginning.
Art of the Advantage.
And then there's the ones in between.
Hide a dagger behind a smile. Outthink the competition. Driving innovation from within. Oh, the way of innovation as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fab. What other books? Look, I'm looking at your. For those of you watching on the radio, yes. You've got a substantial bookshelf behind you. What else do you think? A few things that people should pick up.
I think if you're interested in business strategy, Competition Demystified by Bruce Greenwald is maybe the best book on practical competitive advantage. I just interviewed this guy for the culture, Marcus Collins, which is about branding.
Oh,
Great
Yeah,
book.
had him on the podcast.
You did.
He's good, isn't he?
Yeah.
He did that. He did some fantastic work for Nike.
Yeah, for Nike, he was Beyonce's social media person. Is released by Dr. Dre. This book is really interesting too. Sandra Matz is coming out soon, Mind Masters, and it is about the fact that we can get much more information, digital information about people. We can psychographically classify them, and we can deliver just the message that's right for that person. If they're an extrovert or introvert, if they're motivated by the future or the past, and how that can be a good thing. We could use that to help people undo bad habits. It can also be manipulated.
You remind me of the Cambridge Analytica scandal that blew up over the
it does.
UK
This
Brexit
Cambridge
vote.
Analytica scandal is actually, she has a great TED Talk, and it begins with the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
And then the other thing I'd like to just get you to touch on, so that people sort of, where to get in touch with you. There's a network you run, Fourth Option Network, which I'm part of, which is fantastic. And so maybe not for CEOs, but for business coaches, maybe you've got a quick 30 seconds on what that's about.
It's an amazing global community. Very small. I don't push it or market it. People find us. They're very successful business coaches who do strategy work, and they want to bring new strategy tools to their clients, help their clients get strategic clarity. And so, it's a community, and we learn from each other and we share tools, but it is based off of primarily my methodology, the Outthinker process.
Fantastic. Kaihan, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. It's flown by, blink of an eye.
Amazing. Yeah, I so enjoyed this. Thank you, Dominic. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.